I'm Alan Robarge, a relationship coach. Welcome to Improve Your Relationships, where I like to talk about attachment injuries and healing attachment trauma. And for this video, let's talk about the quality of our thinking and how we can get hooked and caught up in a story, in a narrative, in the data, the surface consequence of this happened and that happened, this happened, he said this and she said that. And we start churning around the details and we lose sight, you know the phrase, we can't see the forest for the trees. We lose sight of really looking underneath what's fueling some of our obsessive thinking and some of our ways that we're getting distracted and pulled into longing and continually, in a way, distorting reality, distorting the story, using the details of a situation to perpetuate confusion. It's confusion on top of confusion. And so what I want to point out is begin to think about dropping down into the feelings and being able to look at what's actually going on for you internally, as opposed to if we're only focusing on the story, we're focusing on the external happenings around us. He said this, she said this, then we went here, then I got this text message, and can you believe that he said that, and then she responded this way, and we're getting a little too sucked into, we're getting too focused on the chronology and the external happenings that we're losing sight of why we're becoming so triggered and why we are having such a strong response to what's happening. Now, many of us need clarity and understanding, and one way that we get clarity, understanding, is we have to make sense of what happened, and we have to make sense of why did someone say what they said, and why did I respond the way that I responded. So we are not completely doing away with the value of looking at the pieces of the puzzle, but we want to be able to pause and have the skill to pull out of the layer, the immediacy of the storyline. There's a phrase in meditation that goes, drop the storyline, and go inward. Look at your own motivations. Look at what is driving you to have such a strong reaction and to feel hooked into looping around the story of this happened, then that happened, then she texted, then we went here, and then he said this, and it goes on and on and on and on and on, and our mind is looping. So one way to take a break from the looping is to put the actual narrative on hold. Again, the phrase, drop the storyline. And when we drop the storyline, we drop down into our experience. So when all of these things happen up here, what's going on underneath? As far as your fear is getting activated, as far as feeling crushed, feeling unloved, feeling that you don't matter, feeling isolated, feeling that you don't belong, feeling rejected. Whatever it is, there's a point in the story of what's happening that a trigger is activating a feeling state that is so uncomfortable and very so painful that we want to avoid it. And then one way we want to avoid it is we ignore ourselves, we ignore our own experience, and we shift our focus back to the story of what's happening. And this is the way that we have an aversion to our own discomfort. And we think if we latch on to the very thing that has caused this response within us, and that if we then try to play it out in looking at the details and the chronology and what happened, and trying to order the data of the situation so that it makes sense, that process will resolve the intensity of the feeling. Now, yes, it does. Of course, sometimes that could be very satisfying when we figure out the equation, A plus B equals C, and this, and oh, and you get a new piece of information. Oh, right. Oh, okay, so this makes sense. So because of this, then oh, now I see. And then when we have that understanding, we calm down. So yes, there's value to that. But if that is not readily available, we can end up looping in the narrative, in the story, for an hour and a half, or for some people for 4 hours, or some people all weekend, that your mind is just churning in the story. So if it's not readily available, the clarity and the understanding where we're making meaning about what has happened in the story, we need to practice a skill, is to take a break, and the skill is to drop the story, drop the narrative, shift your focus away from trying to monitor all of the details of what happened, and come into your own feeling state and notice, well, what about this is so provocative? What about this has you all worked up? And usually that's going to be a feeling state. Usually you're going to identify feeling sad, feeling afraid, feeling misunderstood. And the moment you can name what that is, then you meet it. You can meet it with a kind of a direct acceptance, a very real acceptance. You say, yes, I feel sad. Yes, that's what's going on. I feel dismissed. I feel disrespected. I feel that I don't belong. And usually at this point, what we do is we safeguard against feeling the difficult feeling, and we jump back into the story, and we think that we have to try to figure out, I can't feel that. I can't feel that feeling. I gotta work real hard to complain more about the situation. I gotta work real hard to text the other person. The other person has to make it right, rectify this situation, connect with me, call me back. We got to get to the bottom of this. And I cannot manage my own feeling until the other person engage. So there's always, and I was just we struggle to manage our own feeling if the other person doesn't engage. And what you and I are doing in this moment is that we're empowering ourselves and to say, no, I have to work with this crushing feeling myself. I have to work with the very difficult feeling of I do not matter. I feel rejected. I feel misunderstood. Whatever it is, whatever the core belief in the feeling state that comes up, it's a crushing sadness, or let's say it's a longing. It's a very activated longing. And so in that moment, we put the story on hold, we put seeking a solution on hold, we put expecting another person to make it better on hold, and we come back to ourselves and say, yes, I do feel this way, and I am going to embrace feeling this way. There is a surrender into the feeling. There is a resignation, and to say, yes, I do feel sad. I feel crushed by what has happened. I feel an intense pain, a physical pain in my body. And we respond to ourselves with self-soothing through naming reality. To name reality is to very simply repeat to yourself the feeling state that you're having, which is, yeah, I feel crushed. I feel sad. I feel because of what has happened, and I'm so misunderstood that I'm being disrespected, or I do not matter, or I'm going to be alone. I'm so alone here. I'll probably be alone forever. Whatever it is, your job is not to take the bait to argue with yourself or to prove it wrong. There's a more of a surrender, to exhaling into, to say, okay, then that's where it's at. Then I'm going to feel crushed. Then I'm going to feel sad. Then I don't matter. So I can feel I don't matter. And the idea is to create a break from the story And from scrambling around to, like we're a hamster in a wheel and we have speedy mind and we got to solve this, it has to make sense. And, I need resolution and the other person needs to say, that he or she is sorry. And we take a break, we drop that agenda and we drop the story and we exhale into the feeling of where we're at in this moment. And I'm crushed, I'm sad, and I take a breath. And then it's from this place that we begin to realize that the sadness is my sadness. The other person is not responsible for my sadness. I can be responsible for my sadness. And in this place, what do I need? What happens? I ask myself that question. What do I need? How can I help the sadness? Or maybe even, what does the sadness need? Oftentimes, when I do this, I slow down. There's a counter response to the looping, speedy mind. And when I'm dropping into the feeling, I'm noticing it activates grief. And there are many components to grief, and in this moment, I just want to point out there's a kind of generic sadness that we would think of grief, but it encompasses the whole range of feeling states and how we process it using it through loss. Grief is also a vehicle. It is the process that our brain uses, our psyche uses. We have this built-in function of grieving that helps us make sense of our reality, helps us process overwhelming emotions, and there is a healing component to take care of ourselves when we engage in the grief process. So when I slow down, I surrender, I resign myself to be honest and direct with what actually is underneath the story of what has happened. And when I drop into this feeling, usually what happens for me is this activates a grief process. And it might follow with a wave of sadness. It might follow with some tears. It might follow with what we would consider a bit more traditional grieving. But it could also mean a sense of coming into our body, coming into awareness, and we're going to start to notice some distance, even in our mind. It's this, we're inviting some spaciousness. A distance to the story occurs so that we're not as hooked. Now, keep in mind that your mind, my mind, all of our minds, are very tenacious and very slippery and very easily provoked. So we're talking about maybe even nanoseconds or milliseconds where you get these little breaks and then your mind swoops back in and there's this churning of the longing, churning of the story, the previous, the storyline gets picked back up and you're right back in. I can't believe that this happened, and she did this, and he did this, and then they called her, and then they texted me, can you believe that she said that? And then I said this back, and then, oh, that was so hurtful, because then we had to drive over. And you take a break, you take a breath, and you drop back into, okay, what's happening right now? What's going on for me right now? This is a really important skill to have, because it can interrupt the churning storyline of the mind and how we keep looping. But something that happens if you loop in your mind over the story for a half hour, if you loop in your mind over an hour and a half, if you loop in your mind for 8 days, for a month, however long you are noticing this obsessive quality of being over-identified with the narrative and the story of what has happened, it can very easily begin to distort reality. It can distort the story. We start telling the story in a way that we tell the story we want to hear. So if someone was hurtful and unkind, if we hang out here long enough and continually obsess on the same parts of the story, this unhelpful, unkind interaction turns into, we interpret it as this person is now mean and evil. We have this ability to turn up the volume. We exaggerate. And now we're looping, and this person is mean and this person is evil. And as we distort reality and exaggerate the intensity, it's also going to provoke additional core beliefs, or we're going to, I call it creating layers. We put a layer on top of what has happened. So we might have an interaction, this happened, and this happened, but instead of being able to take it at face value, I will project meaning. I will create a judgment on top of what happened. And so I'm no longer telling the story of what actually happened at face value. I'm telling a new story which is designed to collect evidence to reinforce and support the judgments that I'm creating out of the situation, to apply judgments to the other person. I could apply judgments to myself, such as, therefore I'm an idiot. And it's this phrase, therefore, because this happened, because that happened, because this happened, therefore fill in the blank. If you look at the story, if you look at what you're looping on, and then ask yourself, what additional meaning are you interpreting or laying on top of the experience? One way to get to that core belief that you're creating is to use the phrase, therefore, comma, and then fill in the blank. Or therefore it means fill in the blank. Because you did this, because we had this argument, because this situation happened, story, therefore it means I'm rejected. Therefore it means I do not matter. Therefore it means our relationship is going to end and I will never be loved. Oftentimes it's the concluding meaning, the judgments, the layers that provoke this profound discomfort, because that's going to summarize our fear. So if the fear is, because this happened, therefore I do not matter, that creates a feeling state of panic. And now I'm leading from this panic. And if I return to the story to solve the story, this happened, then this happened, he said this, she said, and my brain is focusing on repeating the story, and I'm not looking at the fact that I am fueling my own panic by assigning a layer of meaning to what happened. I'm getting stuck in a self-perpetuating system that is feeding and fueling my own panic. And this is how I could stay, potentially hours in this place in my mind, looping, and in my body, because this is a body experience, a body sensation. It's physically painful. I do feel the panic. However, because the way that I'm getting sucked into the story each time that I attempt to retell the story to myself, and if I do not look at this added layer of meaning and the judgment that I'm creating out of what happened, and addressing that, so not addressing the story, not making sense of what happened, but making sense and being able to offer myself comfort around the concluding judgment that I'm bringing to my own interpretation of the situation, or interpretation of my relationship, or interpretation of the future. If I can do that, I begin to break, I begin to interrupt this self-perpetuating process that keeps feeding on itself. And that's what we're looking for. We're trying to interrupt the obsessive hook of repeating the story and reinforcing the same judgments, the layers of judgment and meaning that we're bringing to the situation. That's provoking our own fear and provoking our own discomfort and provoking our suffering. And one way to do this is take a breath, surrender, resign into the feeling state, and attend to the meaning and say, well, that's interesting. Look at how I'm creating that conclusion that I don't matter. And if I feel like that, well, then that's how I feel right now. And I'm going to take a breath, and I'm going to offer myself some comfort. I'm going to offer myself some gentleness. I'm going to offer myself some kindness. And this is done, these are not just words I'm saying, this is a discipline. This is very, very sincerely, very a committed way of taking a breath and saying, well, how can I be kind to myself? It's an intention. It's a gentleness. And to say, wow, I'm creating this story that I do not matter. And I understand that I feel that way, and I understand I have enough evidence collected by what has happened that it makes sense that I'm concluding that I don't matter. But my biggest place of the hook, my biggest place of pain is believing in the meaning that I'm assigning to what's happened. And if I can begin to soften or loosen up that meaning so that it's not as true as I keep telling myself that it is. Like, why does it have to be true that I don't matter? Now, I get that I feel that I don't matter, and I understand, many people watching this video, sure, you feel like you don't matter, but that's not actually proof that it's true of a definitive statement that you don't matter. You can still matter even if you feel you don't matter, and forgive me if that sounds confusing. It's like the paradox, the idea of we're trying to find comfort in the discomfort. So we're trying to hold the truth that we matter even though we feel like we don't matter. And that the feeling state is temporary, and that the feeling state, it comes and goes and comes and goes. I matter, I don't matter, I matter, I don't matter. But the underlying truth is I'm okay with myself. I can be okay with myself. And for some people who will in this moment say, well, I don't feel okay with myself. I don't even believe that. Well, then that's your work. Then you have to do the same thing I'm doing here and drop into that feeling state. And you have another round, another chapter, the same way that I'm mapping it out here and taking a breath and surrender and resign. Feel the feeling, give yourself some comfort, really pull out of the story. Telling yourself the story you don't matter, that in and of itself is a story. So this is really sophisticated work because it is slow, it is methodical, it is disciplined, it's very intentional. And many people who are so edgy and so upset about something that's going on in their relationship, you might not have the skill to slow down enough to shift your focus. You might find yourself really getting sucked back into the story. If that's the case, you do the best that you can. You come back to the body, you come back to the breath, and you try to pull out, you try to see these different layers of when you drop the story and you're just sitting with yourself right here, right now. What do you notice? Chances are whatever you feel, you don't like it. And because you don't like it, you have an aversion to feeling it, and you want to jump right back in. Either it's not really intentional. Your mind will make you want to jump right back in to start churning in the story. It's a technique that our mind uses to distract us from feeling the thing that we don't want to feel. So I hope that this is helpful to begin to work with your mind, to begin to discern, pulling out of the story, connecting to your feeling state, and then looking at how you assign meaning, and you create a judgment out of what's happening, and that judgment itself fuels and activates a very painful feeling state that is going to invite you to avoid that itself, and then this whole system just keeps feeding on itself. It's perpetuating. I hope that this video was helpful, please subscribe to this YouTube channel if you want to see more videos just like this one. And also to learn more about me, please go to alanrobarge.com.